The old man, Elias Thorne, was a fixture in the small town of Havenwood, as constant and weathered as the oak tree that shaded his small clapboard house. He was a man carved from silence, his days measured by the slow turning of seasons and the patient work of his hands. A retired carpenter and handyman, he moved with a quiet economy, a slight, persistent limp the only outward sign of a past he never spoke of. His face was a roadmap of 80 years, lined with the kind of sorrow that had settled deep into the bone, leaving behind not bitterness, but a profound and gentle gravity. He was a widower, his beloved Clara gone for a decade, and the house had grown quiet around him. His only company was the hum of his table saw, the scent of sawdust and pine, and the ghosts of laughter that clung to the floral wallpaper in the kitchen. For the most part, the town left him alone. He was seen as a relic, a harmless eccentric who kept to himself, fixed what was broken for a pittance, and expected nothing in return. But to the children of the newer, more affluent families on the edge of town, he was something else. He was a target. It began with whispers and jeers from a safe distance. A trio of boys, led by a sharp-faced 10-year-old named Leo Miller, made it their after-school sport. They would ride their gleaming bicycles past his property, their voices carrying on the wind. "Look, it's Old Man Thorne," Leo would shout. Bet his leg fell off and he glued it back on wrong. His two followers, Sam and Maya's older brother, would laugh, the sound sharp and cruel. They mimicked his limp, lurching in exaggerated, mocking steps. They called his old, rust-pocked Ford truck a junkyard on wheels. Elias would be in his garden, tending to his tomato plants, his back to them. He heard every word. He never turned, never acknowledged them. His silence seemed to infuriate them, stoking their small flames of malice into a bolder fire. Soon, the taunts were not enough. Small pebbles began to arc over his fence, landing harmlessly among the marigolds Clara had planted years ago. Elias would find them later, small, gray stones nestled against the vibrant orange petals, and he would simply toss them back into the dirt lane. He understood the casual cruelty of youth, the need to feel powerful by making another feel small. He saw not villains, but children adrift, their boredom curdling into unkindness. One crisp autumn afternoon, the cruelty escalated. Elias was in his workshop, the door open to the cool air, carefully restoring a rick-backed rocking chair for the widow at the end of the lane. The scent of wood stain filled the air. He heard the familiar, sharp laughter outside, closer this time. A hard thud against his fence post, then another. He looked up from his work. They were throwing bigger stones now, aimed at the faded, hand-carved sign that hung over his gate. Thorne's Woodcraft. Mending and making. He laid his brush down and walked to the door, his limp more pronounced when he was weary. He stood in the shadows of the doorway watching them. Leo, bold and puffed with an unearned pride, wound up to throw another rock. Beside him stood Sam, eager and sycophantic. And a little behind them, hesitant, was Maya. She was younger, perhaps 7, clutching a small, worn object in her hand. She wasn't laughing. Her expression was a mixture of fascination and unease. Leo's rock struck the sign with a loud crack, chipping a piece of the painted T. He let out a whoop of triumph. Bullseye! Elias's heart felt a pang, not of anger, but of a quiet, aching sadness. That sign was the last thing he and Clara had made together. He stepped out of the workshop. The sunlight caught his silver hair. "That's enough, son," he said, his voice not loud, but carrying a weight that made all 3 of them freeze. Startled, Leo dropped the rock in his hand. For a moment, they were just children caught in the act, their bravado evaporating. But Leo's shame quickly morphed back into defiance. "Or what, old man? You gonna chase us with your bad leg?" In the sudden tension, Maya stumbled backward. The small object she was holding slipped from her grasp and fell onto the hard-packed dirt of the lane. There was a faint, sharp crack. Her face crumpled. The boys, distracted by their confrontation with Elias, didn't notice. "Go on home," Elias said, his voice still level. There's no sport to be had here. He held their gaze, and in his eyes, there was no threat, only a deep, bottomless exhaustion. It unnerved them more than any shout could have. Leo scoffed, grabbed his bike, and pedaled away, Sam scrambling to follow. They left Maya standing there, staring down at the ground, tears welling in her eyes. Elias watched until the boys were out of sight. Then his gaze softened and fell on the little girl. She knelt, her small hands scooping up the pieces of what had been a tiny, carved wooden bird. His delicate wing had snapped clean off. She held the broken pieces in her palm, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. She looked up at Elias, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and sorrow, then scrambled to her feet and ran, leaving the fractured toy behind in her haste. Elias waited. The afternoon sun slanted low, casting long shadows. When he was sure she was gone, he walked out of his gate, his bad leg protesting with each step. He knelt, his old joints groaning, and carefully picked up the 2 pieces of the broken bird. It was crudely carved, clearly a child's treasure, smoothed by countless hours of being held. The wood was pine, the grain simple. He held the small body and the severed wing in his own calloused palm. He felt the phantom weight of other broken things he had held, mended, and tried to make whole again. He didn't see a broken toy. He saw a small, broken piece of a child's heart. And Elias Thorne, for as long as he could remember, could not abide leaving broken things to lie in the dust. Back in his workshop, under the steady glow of a bare bulb, Elias cleared a space on his workbench. The world outside fell away. Here, amidst the scent of cedar and oil, he was not an old, forgotten man. He was a craftsman. He was a healer. He examined the break. It was clean but delicate. A simple glue job wouldn't be enough. It would be too fragile. It needed to be reinforced. Needed care. He selected a miniature drill bit, no thicker than a needle, and with the surgeon-like precision that came from 60 years of working with wood, he drilled a tiny hole into both the body of the bird and the detached wing. He found a small brass pin, snipped it to the perfect length, and gently worked it into the hole on the bird's body, leaving a fraction of it exposed. A microscopic dab of wood glue, a substance he mixed himself to a perfect viscosity, was applied to the break. Then, with the steadiness of a man defusing a bomb, he aligned the wing and slid it onto the exposed pin. The fit was perfect. He clamped it in a small, padded vise to set, his touch impossibly gentle. He worked for over an hour, oblivious to the growing dark outside. He cleaned away the minuscule bead of excess glue with a fine cloth and a bit of mineral spirits. When it was dry, he took a piece of the finest grit sandpaper and smoothed the seam until it was almost invisible to the touch. He noticed the paint was faded, so he found his old box of hobby paints from a time he'd built models with a son he never had. He mixed a touch of brown and white until it perfectly matched the bird's faded coat and, with the tip of a single hair brush, he touched up the mended line. He left it to dry overnight. He felt no sense of accomplishment, no thought of reward. The act itself was the purpose. It was a small act of order in a world that so often tended toward chaos and fracture. It was a quiet rebellion against the carelessness he had witnessed earlier that day. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Elias took the mended bird and walked to his gate. The little creature felt whole in his hand, its wing once again poised for a flight it would never take. He didn't want to frighten the girl or make a show of it. He simply placed the bird on top of the fence post, the very one the boys had been throwing rocks at. It stood there, a tiny, silent sentinel, waiting for its owner. He spent the morning in his garden, keeping half an eye on the lane. Around noon he saw her. Maya was walking home from school alone, her head down, scuffing her shoes in the dirt. As she drew near his house, she looked up, her gaze instinctively going to the fence. She stopped dead. Her eyes widened. She took a hesitant step closer, then another, until she was right in front of the post. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the bird, running a finger over the mended wing. She picked it up, cradling it in both hands, her expression one of pure, unadulterated wonder. She looked toward the house, toward the window where Elias was watching, though she could not see him. A small, brilliant smile broke across her face. She clutched the bird to her chest and ran the rest of the way home, her steps light and joyful. Elias felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't realized he'd been missing so acutely. It was the quiet satisfaction of a wound closed, a kindness delivered and received without a single word exchanged. He didn't know it then, but that small, mended bird was a seed, and it had just been planted in the most fertile and unexpected ground. The bullying stopped. When Leo and his friends passed Elias's house now, they were silent. Leo would cast a quick, furtive glance toward the old man's property, his expression unreadable and pedal faster. The small act of grace had disarmed them more effectively than any punishment. Weeks later, a fierce autumn storm tore through Havenwood. Wind howled like a hungry wolf, and rain fell in punishing sheets. The next morning, the town was a mess of downed branches and debris. The greatest casualty on Elias's street was at the Miller house. A massive limb from their ancient maple tree had snapped, crushing a large section of their pristine white picket fence and ornate gate. Elias saw it from his window as he sipped his morning coffee. He saw Mr. Miller, Leo's father, standing in his yard, hands on his hips, surveying the damage with a deep scowl. Mr. Miller was a busy man, a regional sales manager who was often on the road, and his frustration was palpable even from a distance. He kicked at a piece of the splintered gate, swore under his breath, and went back inside, likely to make a series of angry phone calls. All day the wreckage sat there. Elias saw Leo come out a few times and listlessly pick at the smaller branches, but the main damage was too much for a boy to handle. That evening, as dusk settled, Elias put on his worn canvas jacket, gathered his tools. A handsaw, a pry bar, a hammer, and a box of assorted nails and screws, and walked across the street. Mr. Miller answered the door, a phone pressed to his ear. He looked at Elias with unconcealed irritation. "Yes? What is it?" Elias simply nodded toward the broken fence. "Looks like you could use a hand," he said, his voice calm. "I can clear the heavy limb and see if the gate's salvageable." Mr. Miller lowered his phone, suspicion clouding his features. He knew who Elias was, the strange old man his son and his friends had been tormenting. "I'm calling a contractor in the morning," he said curtly. "It's handled. Contractor will be busy for a week with this storm," Elias replied, his gaze steady. "And he'll charge you double. Let me at least get the path cleared for you."
"No charge."
Before Mr. Miller could object, Elias turned and walked toward the wreckage. He worked with a methodical grace that belied his age and his limp. He sawed the massive limb into manageable sections, his movements efficient and sure. He stacked the wood neatly by the curb. He pried the broken gate from its hinges, the wood splintered beyond simple repair. He assessed the fence posts. One was cracked but could be braced. Leo came out onto the porch and watched, a silhouette in the warm light of the doorway. He saw the old man he had mocked working tirelessly to repair the damage to his home, asking for nothing in return. The boy's face was a storm of confusion and a shame so profound it felt like a physical weight. Mr. Miller eventually came outside, his phone call finished. He stood there for a long time watching Elias work. The old man didn't speak, just focused on the task, his breath pluming in the cold night air. The quiet, selfless industry of the man was a silent rebuke to his own loud, impotent frustration. "You don't have to do this," Mr. Miller said, his voice softer now. "Easier to fix something than to stare at it," Elias said without looking up, as he measured a length of broken fence. "It's what I do." He worked for another hour, bracing the cracked post and clearing the last of the debris. He loaded the shattered remains of the gate into his old truck to take back to his workshop. "I'll see if I can rebuild this," he told Mr. Miller. "Might take a few days." Mr. Miller just nodded, speechless. It was 2 days later, a Saturday morning, when the long, black car appeared. It rolled down the quiet street with an authority that made neighbors peer out their windows. It was a government vehicle, sleek and immaculate, a stark contrast to the small-town setting. It pulled to a stop not in front of Elias's house, but directly in front of the miller's, where Elias was busy fitting a new, freshly milled post into the ground. Leo was in the yard, handing Elias tools in a clumsy but earnest attempt to help. Mr. Miller was on his porch, holding a mug of coffee he had brought out for the old man. Everyone froze as the back door of the car opened. A man emerged, and he seemed to draw all the light of the morning to himself. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the deep blue dress uniform of a United States Army general. 5 silver stars were perfectly aligned on each shoulder, gleaming in the sun. His face was stern but noble, his presence so commanding it felt as if the very air had grown still and respectful. The general scanned the street, his eyes passing over the houses until they landed on the old man kneeling in the dirt. A slow, profound recognition dawned on his face. "Doc?" the general said, his voice a low rumble that carried across the lawn. "Doc Thorne." Elias looked up from his work, his hands covered in dirt. He squinted at the decorated officer. A flicker of memory, distant and clouded by time, moved behind his eyes. He slowly, painfully rose to his feet, wiping his hands on his trousers. The general strode across the lawn, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the soft grass. He stopped a few feet from Elias, his gaze sweeping over the old man's worn clothes, his limp, the lines on his face. There was a reverence in his look, an emotion so powerful it was startling. "It is you?" the general said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been looking for you for years. After you mustered out, you just vanished." Mr. Miller and Leo stood frozen, unable to comprehend the scene unfolding before them. "General," Elias said, his voice raspy. He recognized the man now, not as a 5-star general, but as a terrified, 19-year-old lieutenant with a leg full of shrapnel, lying in the mud of a jungle floor half a world away. "Finch, Lieutenant Finch, you look different." General Alistair Finch let out a short, choked laugh.
"Immaginido."
"You look exactly the same, just as stubborn, I see. Still fixing things that other people have broken." He gestured to the fence. Then his eyes, sharp and practiced at assessing men, fell on Leo, who looked as if he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. "Sir," Elias said, falling back on old protocols. "This is Mr. Miller and his boy, Leo, my neighbors." General Finch gave them a polite, formal nod, but his attention was entirely on Elias. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice resonating with authority, "do you know who this man is?" Mr. Miller shook his head, dumbfounded. "He's Elias, our neighbor." The general's expression became solemn. "This man is Corporal Elias Thorne, though we all just called him Doc. He was a combat medic. The finest I ever saw. In the spring of '68, my platoon was ambushed in the Ashau Valley. Place God forgot. We were pinned down, cut to pieces. I took a round to the chest, another in my leg. I was bleeding out, waiting to die." He paused, his gaze fixed on Elias, as if seeing him back there in the smoke and chaos. Then he appeared, crawling through the mud and fire, no weapon in his hand, just his medical bag. They were throwing everything they had at us. He shielded me with his own body while he worked, and he took the burst of machine gun fire that was meant to finish me off. The general instinctively touched his own chest, then looked down at Elias's left leg, the one with the pronounced limp. "That limp, that's from my life." He dragged me and 3 other wounded men back to the LZ one by one. He refused to be evacuated himself until every last one of his boys was on a chopper. They had to force him. Silence descended, thick and heavy. Leo's face was pale, his mouth agape. Mr. Miller stared at the humble old man he had dismissed, who was now being revealed as a titan. The taunts, the rocks, the casual cruelty. It all came rushing back to Leo, searing him with a shame so hot it brought tears to his eyes. This man, this hero, was the person he had tormented. "I spent 35 years in the army," General Finch continued, his voice softer now, and directed only at Elias. I have a wife, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. I have all of this. He swept a hand to indicate his stars, his uniform, his entire life. Because of what you did on the worst day of my life, I'm retiring next month. I came here because I had to find you. I had to thank you. From his uniform pocket, the general produced a heavy, bronze coin. He held it out. I know it's not much after all this time, but it's my command coin, a symbol of my gratitude. For everything. Elias looked at the coin, then at the general's face. He slowly reached out his dirt-stained hand and took it. It was heavy, solid, real. He closed his fingers around it. You were just a boy, Alistair. I was just doing my job. You were doing more than your job, Doc, the general said, his voice cracking slightly. You were teaching us what it meant to be human in a place that was designed to strip it all away. The story of the general's visit rippled through Havenwood not like a shockwave, but like a slow, rising tide. It wasn't in the local paper. General Finch had been discreet, his visit personal. But Leo Miller told his mother. Mr. Miller told his colleague at the hardware store. The woman whose rocking chair Elias had fixed told her Bible study group. The news spread through quiet conversations, over backyard fences and coffee counters, imbued with a sense of awe and collective shame. The town began to respond, not with parades or plaques, but in the small, meaningful language of a community waking up to its own heart. Someone left a freshly baked apple pie on Elias's porch. The owner of the hardware store, when Elias went to buy lumber for the new gate, refused his money, simply saying, "This one's on the house, Mr. Thorne." People who used to look past him now met his eyes and nodded, a newfound respect in their greetings. He was no longer invisible. He was Elias. One afternoon, there was a soft knock on his door. It was Leo. The boy stood on the porch, twisting the hem of his shirt, his eyes fixed on the floorboards. In his outstretched hand, he held the small, mended wooden bird. I wanted to say I'm sorry," Leo mumbled, his voice thick, "for everything, for the rocks, and what we said." He finally looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "And thank you." For this, he held the bird up. Elias looked at the boy, at his earnest, remorseful face. He saw not the bully, but the child underneath, the one who was just learning the weight of his own actions. "A good man knows how to mend what he's broken, son," Elias said gently. "In himself and in the world. It looks like you're on the right path." He didn't take the bird. "You keep that. To remind you." Leo nodded, clutching the bird tightly. Can I help you finish the gate?" Elias smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I could use a hand." And so they worked together, the old hero and the boy who was learning how to be a good man. They measured, sawed, and hammered in a comfortable silence, passing tools back and forth. Mr. Miller joined them, his earlier arrogance replaced by a quiet, humble desire to assist. The three of them, a mismatched crew bound by a shared moment of revelation, rebuilt the gate. They made it stronger than it was before. When it was finished, it stood as more than just a barrier of wood and iron. It was a testament to a debt repaid, a lesson learned, and a bridge built between 2 generations. That evening, Elias sat on his own porch as the sun bled across the horizon in strokes of orange and purple. The air was cool and clean. He held the general's heavy coin in his hand, its raised 5-star emblem cool against his palm. He thought of the mended bird in a young boy's pocket, and the new gate standing straight and proud across the lane. The quiet of his life remained, but it was no longer the quiet of loneliness. It was the quiet of peace. He looked out over his small garden, at the sleeping tomato plants and the marigolds that still bloomed defiantly against the coming frost. The world was full of broken things, always would be, but here and there, if a person was willing, something could be mended. A piece of wood, a fence, a boy's conscience, a town's memory. He slipped the coin into his pocket, its weight a comforting presence against his leg, and watched the last of the light fade feeling the steady, hopeful promise of a new day about to dawn.